One other thing that kind of comes to my mind. So let's say there's a nonprofit executive that's listening to our podcast. Can you take us through, because it sounds like you have a set, process that you go through. Can you kind of take us through your intake and the types of questions that you delve into on your podcast with them?
First, we're at many, many events. So I do a lot of dinners and a lot of the organization's activities. As you can imagine, I could be doing 5 a week if I could afford it. I feel obligated to contribute something, but I'll go broke if I go to everybody's event. But I want to be there to hear the stories that they show or that they demonstrate at those events. And we've had some really significant ones over the course of the last, even just the last few months. I mean, St. John's Program for Real Change, it was their 40th anniversary. It was the 30th anniversary of A Touch of Understanding, another great organization in Placer County, and 10th anniversaries and 20th anniversaries, as you know, the Alliance 10 years. So these things come up, and they're so significant that when you're involved in them to the degree that we are, you want to make sure that you're asking all the questions that somebody who wants to know about that organization needs to know. And so the cadence of questions really starts with, tell us a little bit about the organization. Let us, and I do a fair amount of homework before that happens. There's a discovery call, not unlike we did prior to this conversation, to learn a little bit about the organization, understand them a little bit better, understand how that executive leadership or that executive director I'm speaking with is going to be telling their story. And then we flow through collaborative opportunities. Who do they work with? I have had organizations I've turned down because they say, well, we really don't. What we do is so unique. Well, what you do is so unique, you will work yourself out of a job, not because you've cured the problem, but because you've gone broke. And that doesn't work for me. I want to see a collaborative effort. I want to see you reaching out to other organizations that maybe are on the fringe of your services that could provide a greater service to the mission and the cause with multiple organizations participating. And so that's really an important part of the conversation. And I think donors want to hear that too. They want to know that you're out there talking to other organizations supportively. And then from there, we work into the funding. How is the organization funded? What is your big idea? What if there was no money involved? What if you had all the money in the world? What if a donor gave you a check that said, here, whatever you want to do, what would you do? And we want that organization to be able to share that vision, that dream of untethered, unrestricted funding. And what does that look like? And that gives a donor a really good perspective. Oh, I love that idea. I want to help them get to it. And then we come back to reality. What's the greatest need? Because there aren't too many blank checks out there. And you get that feel and that flexibility and that understanding on how that executive director knows their organization. Mm-hmm. And then we ask about impact, how they measure in their impact, how do they know that they're successful, how do they know that what they're doing is working. This is where they really get the opportunity to storytell, and they can get into a situation. Imagine this. Imagine a family, whether it be housing insecurity or food insecurity or substance abuse or domestic violence, you name it. They can get into that story for you as the listener to really understand, to put a piece of humanity to it, what it looks like. And it's amazing to me how well some of those stories get told and the impact some of those stories have. So we really work with them to make sure that their story has a human element. Mm-hmm. It's nice to hear stats and figures, and that's good. The data is important, but it loses humanity and it numbs the listener. And so we make sure that there's a really human element to the conversation. And then we tend to wrap with a thing that we call Beyond the Mission, where we get a little bit of personal information out of them. And it could be a set of fast questions. So I could look at you, Dominick, or I could look at you, Justin, and say, okay, cat or dog, coffee or tea, stairs or escalator, favorite movie, favorite color, what kind of car, boom, 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 boom. What's favorite pastime? And it's fun, it's fast, we end on a light note, and it gives the listener the ability to learn a little about the person that they've just heard telling, in some cases, these really heavy stories. In others, they're not all that heavy. There's some great when we're talking about theater, it's a nonprofit. We want to hear the stories of theater. Why does theater work? The arts are important in our community. We'll talk to chambers of commerce because business is important. And by bringing those listeners in that want to listen to a chamber of commerce, even the arts, we're exposing them to all the other nonprofits that we've got in the or in the system to say, oh, look, I'm curious about that organization. Weave. What's that? Oh, that's domestic violence. I've heard of them. Or it's Sacramento Food Bank, or you name it. There's something there for everybody. So by doing that spectrum of organizations that are .orgs, nonprofits, it gives that vision of anybody that's coming into our platform a perspective of how big this ecosystem of nonprofits really is in Sacramento. Last I looked, I was just looking at 15,000 nonprofits, about $38 billion in revenue annually to the community.
Someone was saying, it may have been you, but I can't remember. I think it was you. It's about how people try to, say Sacramento's like the largest, of nonprofit area, like
I'll give
geographically. You're
Yeah.
the one, right? I think you're the one that said that, right?
No, I'm the one trying to correct it. That's not
That's
true.
what I mean. That's what I mean. That it's not
Yeah.
true. That's what I mean. That
There's
you were the one refuting
there's
the
some misnomer out there that's been bantered around, and I hear it from so many people. And I correct them every time I hear it. It's something to the effect of, Sacramento is second only to Washington, D.C. in the number of nonprofits and, the amount of money given. And it's not true. It's not true. Sacramento's 20-something in its rank for nonprofits. Its nonprofit rank for per capita is not as good. People don't give as much here. As a matter of fact, on tax returns, this is, I think, maybe from 2019, 2020, so it's not quite the most recent data. But they were looking at, tax return deductions. I mean, Sacramento was awful in terms of its percentages. Maybe 30% of the people had a deduction for a nonprofit on their tax returns. Unlike San Francisco, which was up around 57, 60%, San Diego around 60%, LA around 60%. And you think about it, those are much bigger money markets too. And they're corporate markets. So it's not surprising, but no, Sacramento is not very philanthropic, relatively speaking. We're not diminishing anything that we get, and I don't mean it that way, but it's state. It's not corporate. Our infrastructure of business is not big corporations, so it's not all that big money, and that's part of the reason it is what it is. It's you talk to nonprofits in Sacramento versus their peers in these other markets in California of the major markets, and they're like, oh my gosh, for us to do a fundraiser to raise X, you look at San Francisco, it's X times 4, and Los Angeles, it's X times 5. It's just very different. So. No, that if you hear that, please correct them. Say, are you sure? Have you looked that up? Just anywhere, search, ask AI. Go on Google and see if you can find some documentation to support that. It doesn't exist.